Thank you everybody for joining on Zoom or joining via live on Facebook. We are here today with Dr. John Byrne, who's going to help us better understand the recently announced renewable energy legislation that was put in an op-ed piece from Senator Harris McDowell on Earth Day this year. Quite an appropriate way to celebrate Earth Day. So Dr. John Byrne, thank you very much for joining us. Do you want to give us a little bit of a background on yourself for folks who are unfamiliar?
Okay, yeah, I'm John Byrne, and many people know me as JB, and you should feel free to use whatever you feel comfortable with. I'm been at the University of Delaware Center for Energy and Environmental Policy for quite some time, working on a host of these issues from international settings. I've been with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change since back in the early 90s, to working on local issues, including the one that we're going to talk about today. Worked on the first RPS bill for the state, and have had the privilege to work on a series of others in this state, plus other locations in the U.S. as well as beyond. And there is I just maybe make a quick shout out, there is a research report that will be released soon, and Joe Nyangan is here. He's a postdoc researcher at the center, and he's kind of leading the charge with that particular project. So we'll have some analytical work. We worked on 14 states in the U.S. On their programs in order to then come to some suggestions about what would be a good program for Delaware. That's me. And Joe.
For everybody that's watching, John, could you give us just kind of a 1-minute rundown of what the RPS is and what it does or kind of hopes to do?
Sure. So RPS is Renewable Portfolio Standard. It's a common tool used by states throughout the U.S. that obliges utility companies serving a state to obtain a percentage of their consumption. They have to have a match of their consumption, a certain percentage that must come from qualifying renewables. The most obvious renewables in that regard are typically wind and solar. And in some cases, as in Delaware, there's a carve out for solar. That is, in the overall percentage, some percentage specifically must come from solar electric power.
Thank you very much. I think it's important to kind of give that kind of broad general scope, because you're going to hear the abbreviation RPS a lot. So I just want to make sure everybody knew what we mean when we say RPS. So this particular bill or proposal has 3 components. Can you give us kind of a brief overview on what those 3 components are?
Sure. They are interrelated, and the 3 are as follows. There is a new schedule that will accelerate the obligation of utilities in the state to draw a higher and higher portion of their service from renewable energy sources. That schedule begins in 2025 when the existing bill and its schedule ends. And so it then kicks in 2025 and moves to 40%. We would be in 2025 by 25%. We'll now kick it to 40% by 2035. That's part 1. Part 2, there is a substantial addition to this bill that enables community solar. Right now, solar projects are normally serving folks who own roofs. Not everybody owns a roof, and it also tends to serve only those who are owners of buildings or of property, and this would allow participation in common, people working together to do it. So that's the community solar component. It is a new one. And then the third is a cap on the costs of the Renewable Portfolio Standard. This is an effort to make sure that the renewable energy market in Delaware does not adversely affect the cost of electricity in the state of Delaware. So those 3 pieces work together. I just quickly mentioned that currently the way things are set up in Delaware, and the bill does not change this. The Delmarva Power customers have an obligation to meet the schedule, the 40% by 2035. It is a voluntary matter for those municipal jurisdictions served by the Delaware Municipal Electric Corporation or by the Delaware Electric Cooperative.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of contentious attitudes with some of the municipalities who often seem to forget that voluntary component, but we won't get into that particularly heavily today. So I do want to ask, though, why a lot of people want to look to the federal government to solve a lot of these really big issues like climate change. So why is state action so important on this kind of legislation?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question, and I do have a prop for this purpose, and so I'm going to just for a moment click on share screen here and bring up a slide that hopefully will be helpful to everyone in trying to understand this. And it is here, if you can see it. So the answer to that question, Dustin, I think is twofold. First of all, the U.S. has had a very difficult time passing a national piece of legislation in this area as well as in climate change. That has something to do with the way in which our national government is organized, but we have not had that problem. In fact, in the U.S., the states have been leading for quite some time. So this is a comparison between 2007, 2019. We already had 23 states involved in 2007. By 2019, we have 32 states involved in using the tool that we're talking about today. They are also the inventors of the Energy Efficiency Resource Standard, which requires that utilities, as a obligation for service in the territory, to reduce not simply the rate of growth in electricity sales, but to reduce electricity sales. This is an effort to promote energy efficiency and conservation, and we've gone from 8 to 31. And the basic tool that's always been used, net metering, we've had net metering for quite some time in the US, and 44 states have it in 2019, as of the end of 2019. And basically it says if a utility charges you 10 cents a kilowatt hour for the power that it provides you, if you now turn around and inject into the grid a kilowatt hour, it has to pay you the 10 cents. So it creates a kind of a parity in that regard. It goes up to, in Delaware's case, up to 110% of your annual consumption. So to answer Dustin's question, I think the local level has found ways to build this policy support throughout the U.S. You can't get these numbers of states, 32, 31, 44. Throughout the U.S., they have found a way to do this, build the policy support. And so I think that's why we now, and why, in fact, if you want to just extend it internationally, that's been found in other parts of the world, and the Paris Agreement for the first time recognized state and local actors as key actors in developing, for example, on climate change. So it's something that I think we have all come to now experience. The state and local levels are the innovators, they are the incubators, and they are the creators of what are the policies driving us in these areas.
Yeah, I think it'd be an interesting brain exercise to try and fathom what a federal RPS program would look like, right? What an interesting thing that could be to imagine. But certainly, as you said, states are able to move on these things much faster and have been very successful in doing so. So
that's right.
You had mentioned the increase in percentage. Is there any other increases or changes that would come about with this legislation after 2025?
Okay, so it will also double the carve out for solar. So solar will go to 6% from what is now about 3% of the target. So that 6% is embedded in the 40, but it means that a greater percentage will now be procured by Delmarva Power from electricity, from solar electricity sources. And so that's a key ingredient as well. And then as I say, there's a new community solar approach which will also change the landscape of Delaware's renewable energy market.
Does this legislation impact at all kind of where the energy is coming from, in-state versus out-of-state situation?
So this particular bill doesn't take up, that I'm aware of, doesn't take up that question. And it is a matter of debate. There have been incentives put in to the existing regulations that favor in-state generation, but particularly for solar. But it does not, Delaware still is not what's called a closed state in terms of only allowing power produced from in-state sources for that purpose. It allows other locations to also provide that power.
So why do we think that we can achieve this specific degree of renewable energy?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, a lot of people worry about this. You know, how can we? Okay, so I think there are two reasons basically why we will be able to achieve 40%. But before I do that, let me just say anecdotally, we already have several states that are over 40%. So, and you know, two of them, New York and California. And during the era of COVID, we have serious issues that we have to look at. But if you were to roll back the tape back into last year, you'll notice that their economies were doing very fine. So why can we do more? We can do more in part because there's been improvements in technology that now allow utilities to accept that injection at that scale. And so that's an important part of it. A second important part of it is that the costs of these technologies have gone down dramatically and are now enabling certain other aspects of development of the market to take place, including, we're not quite there yet on storage, but we're coming. And by 2035, we should be in a world that will have storage. Whether we need it or not, and we really don't, we've got a lot of experience both in Europe and in the US that we can inject that amount, but it does take planning. And you've got to put the power in certain places that it's most needed, and you have to find ways to balance it during different hours of the day and different months of the year. But we pretty much solved that problem now, and so utilities, including Delmarva Power, are pretty adept at this now.
So, but how can we be sure that it doesn't increase rates for ratepayers?
Yeah, an important question for everybody. Yes, so in the bill itself, there is a cap put in that if for some reason there were to be a disturbance in the market in some way that said acquiring more of whatever renewable energy source would mean acquiring more expensive energy than what we have experienced, that the cap itself would kick in and would freeze the development of that amount of solar or wind or other resources until the market had settled back into a more normal range for that. But I also just want to briefly mention, because there is a lot of interesting things out there about this, I just want to briefly mention wind energy has been competitive with natural gas for quite some time. And if you look at one of the largest wind suppliers in the US is Texas, which has no shortage of fossil fuels, and including natural gas, but it's because it is highly competitive. And I just wanted to sort of dispel a little myth out there to answer your question, Dustin. Solar electric power has dropped dramatically in cost over the last 10 years, and it is now competitive with new natural gas units, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Okay, its levelized cost of energy provision is about equal to a natural gas combined cycle unit. So these technologies are already becoming more competitive because of improved technology, but also as you expand the market, we get smart and we do things better than we did before. And with that, you can see these technologies competing. So We need the cap just in case, but I'm just trying to say also there are already at work in the marketplace forces that are getting us to low-cost renewable energy.
Great. So kind of a follow-up question to that is why this particular schedule? Is there something that's driving when we make these bumps, these increases in percentages?
Yeah, that's an excellent, why not just, yeah. So actually last year there was the Senate Energy Committee held a series of hearings in which businesses, technologists, academia, and citizens, okay, put forward their ideas on what was the right kind of schedule for Delaware. And this particular schedule is a consensus schedule that came out of that dialogue.
Thank you. So we had a couple of questions from the audience that I want to get to before we keep going past. So with regard specifically to the RPS, Delaware's RPS, can you speak briefly on how this can benefit low-income neighborhoods in particular?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. We've been through a lot in trying to make a transition in our energy system to make it more sustainable. It would be very unfortunate if we made the error that was made in the system that also got us to some problems with it, which is that we didn't make it fair and affordable to all, so-called in the UN space, sustainable energy for all. We would be making a really big error if we didn't solve that problem. So that is something that we need to work on heavily, and part of what the community solar program is intended to do is exactly that.
So we have a question again from the audience. Does this new legislation have any provision for offshore wind energy? Why or why not? Follow-up question. Why is Delaware kind of slow to start investing in this electricity supply when other states, Maryland, New Jersey, Virginia, are moving ahead? The concern is that will we miss the boat on this emerging market? So if you could respond just to.
Sure, no problem. So on the offshore wind question, a lot of that has to do with, I think at this point, has to do with making regional partnerships for the ability to use offshore wind. It comes in, if you will, big doses. Its economics will look better if it comes in bigger doses rather than smaller doses. And there are a series of other challenges with offshore wind that you've got to solve, which includes bringing the power ashore. State legislation has not had typically a very important role in that. So I think that there have been efforts in some states, but so far the states have not been able to find a way. So I think there is discussion, though, you may know, in a regional compact, and that may have more promise for offshore wind. On the question of Delaware's percentage versus other states' percentage, it's true that other states have higher percentages, but they can also have access to certain resources that Delaware doesn't have. So New York has a much more aggressive policy than Delaware, but they also have Niagara Falls and a great deal of hydroelectric development. California has a much higher and more aggressive rate, but it is also blessed with, for example, a really substantial amount of high quality wind. And so I think it's a balancing act. And could Delaware do better and do more? It could well be. But, you know, that's why you have a legislature and why you work on improving policy with time. I think at this point, given the consensus discussion that came out of last year's hearings, this seems to be the reasonable number. Could we go faster? We possibly could. And that may be a question that many that are on the call want to work on as we move forward.
Yeah. So a question from representative from Oceana, our friend Jacob Ross, who opposes increased RPS standards on the state and national level, And a follow-up question, what's the bottom line reason why people should care about this issue? He said perhaps it will save money on utilities.
Okay. Can you go back up a little more slowly, Dustin? I didn't hear the first one so well. Sorry.
Sure.
My.
Who are the parties that oppose increased RPS standards at the national and state levels?
Do I know who are the parties that oppose it?
Correct.
Is that the question? Yeah. Okay. At the national level, it has been very difficult to get an RPS policy. Now, you might think about it if you just thought in simple math, if you've got 32 states that already have it and you multiply that by 2, it would seem like you had something close to a veto-proof opportunity if the senators supported what their states were doing. But it turns out to be more complex. I think national politics are heavily influenced by lobbying efforts from very large companies that have very significant stakes, and so it's hard at the national level to get things moving. And in terms of state actors that are sometimes it depends upon what your utilities look like. Sometimes they are supporters, sometimes they are not for this kind of strategy. I think the other possibility at the state level is whether we are well organized to essentially improve market opportunities for this purpose. And I would say that in Delaware's case, there's been a pretty good legacy of putting together the legislation needed to create that market opportunity. So as you get actors in it, Delaware has benefited substantially from employment that has come from the industry. And so I think some of the things of that nature are what can drive the positives and outweigh the negatives at the state level.
Great. So before we move on to the next question, we had one question talking about choosing different energy sources. So I will say Sierra Club's not going to endorse any one particular, the Delaware Sierra Club's not going to endorse any one particular energy supplier. However, if you want more information on how to choose renewables, if you're a Delmarva customer, we have a blog post on our website, sierraclub.org/Delaware, that will take you through the process of how to compare different prices and possibly go with an alternative provider than what Delmarva will normally go through. So won't spend any time on that here, but if you want those resources, there are on our website. So this bill, as you said before, doesn't just increase the RPS. It's got a lengthy community solar provision, so I want to spend some time on that. But first, could you just give us in like 60 seconds, what is community solar?
Yeah. So the Delaware Code does have the phrase community solar in it, but it's undefined. So don't be surprised if you're looking for a definition and you haven't yet found it. What we've tried to do in the bill is to create that opportunity. Community solar, as is proposed in the bill, creates the opportunity for cities, incorporated towns, counties, and their community organizations to partner in the effort to create an opportunity for development of solar at a larger scale. That scale can be in terms of roofs of the participating members. It can be the city's own public buildings. It can be a variety of things like that. But the principal thing is to make the governance and administration of community solar to actually have community roots. So I would say that's the biggest difference in what we are trying to do with this bill compared to what has been a definition of community solar that was really more about, let me assemble a bunch of residents, they will pay a price, and that'll allow me to build a bigger solar plant somewhere. But it's not actually governed or administered in any significant way by community. Second quick point on this question, Dustin. Community solar allows those who don't have roofs. And remember, there's a lot of us who don't have roofs. We don't own roofs. And so, but that we can participate in a process of solar development. There is also those who don't have property. They don't have land. And many of us, and we can't simply put windmills or whatever in that way. It allows us to instead come together as communities. Right now, there's something on the order of 40% or so of Delawareans who would find it difficult to participate if you didn't create a community solar program. And finally, I just want to quickly say the partners need not only be residents, the partners can be non-governmental organizations, they can be communities of faith, they can be environmental communities. There's a whole host of opportunities there in that regard. And they can be businesses. If businesses want to come in to cooperate with residents to develop this new resource.
So I think you mentioned this a little bit, but can you just kind of compare and contrast what we have now? Because there have been so-called community solar projects that have come about. How are those going to really differ in terms of what they look like compared to this?
Yeah, so I think let me just say the existing statute allows an aggregation of subscribers to buy power from a source. That source is typically a private company. Some of you may have been introduced to Solar City. Some of you may have been introduced to Sunrun. There's a variety of companies that try to offer this sort of aggregated case. And the members of the state that sign up, you subscribe and you end up paying for the project to be developed and maintained, okay? That is what the bill does, what the bill puts in place is not in lieu of that. That can remain, and I'm sure you will still see those opportunities as well. Now, Delaware doesn't have very many community solar projects under the existing approach that depends largely on private companies pulling together subscribers, but that one will remain. I just want to be clear, okay? The new one actually puts the action for the opportunity in the hands of something called a Community Sustainable Energy Authority, which is created under the law. Every city, every incorporated town, all 3 counties will now all have the opportunity to work with their community organizations to create these authorities. And when they do that, you're going to then have an ability to govern the program differently than this more, if you will, subscriber solar that has been the conventional expression of the community solar approach in Delaware.
So that actually kind of, just for clarification's sake, that kind of bleeds into my next question actually. So who would run the projects? The state running it, the county, the cities, who's the community, who's running the project?
So the project would be run, the projects would be run by a combination of cities, incorporated towns, counties. They have to fully develop an authority for that purpose, okay? And community organizations. Those community organizations, as I say, can range from churches getting together. Dustin asked me about the idea of a school board and schools getting together. That would be a sort of, if you will, public entity that did that. You could combine the public and the community together. That's what this new approach would allow.
So how would what would kind of be the funding mechanism if a community or faith community would like to come together to create a project?
Yeah.
Does the state have to provide funding in this bill? Is there funding attached to this bill?
So there are broadly three ways in which funding is going to come to the project, okay? One way is that the bill creates something called community solar renewable energy credits. The utility, as a condition of its operation in the state, has to buy a certain carved out amount of community solar renewable energy credits. What are community solar renewable energy credits? They are basically the payment that the utility makes in order to be able to count that as part of their compliance with the law. And that occurs in a competitive market. So it will be different entities offering those community solar RECs. But in this case, it will only be through the cities, the counties, and the incorporated towns. They will offer it in conjunction with community organizations, but that's one flow of funds. does not exist in the state of Delaware at this time. Okay? It will exist as community solar develops. Second source is a source that comes through an entity that was created some years back. I had the privilege to work on that, called the Delaware Sustainable Energy Utility, which is a financing entity. It is a nonprofit entity, and it develops long-term financing at relatively low rates and has been quite successful. If you've been to the southern part of the state, you might notice that there are an awful lot of solar projects that are at farms, including chicken farms, and a lot of that has been developed in partnership with the Delaware Sustainable Energy Utility. And the third source is that, to be direct about it, there is a market of companies that are interested in this technology because it often is lower cost. That is, at this time, you can sometimes purchase this technology's output at a rate that is cheaper than what you might have to pay in the conventional market. So that's the consumer that will then also be willing to make this this shift. So those are the three sources I would say, Dustin, for this purpose.
Point of clarification, partly for myself, the previous versions of this bill had the ability for the municipality to work with the authority to get bonds. Is that still available?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, the bonds can be issued either by, that's what the Delaware Sustainable Energy Utility does. It has the ability to issue bonds. And so it can bring entities throughout the state for that purpose. But you can also, in many cases, the cities have their own bonding authority, and the three counties have their own bonding authority as well.
Thank you. So we had a question from one of our viewers on Facebook. We actually have a couple that we're going to get to now. One in particular, though, you had mentioned multiple times incorporated areas specifically. So how will unincorporated areas benefit?
Excellent question. We worked a lot on that particular question. So all unincorporated areas are in counties. So one thing that you can do is to then work with your county, if you are in an unincorporated area, to develop its, under the statute, they have the authority to create a sustainable energy authority. And so the counties can be the host for that sort of purpose, okay, for an unincorporated area. And let me just quickly, because you asked, Dustin, just point out why that's going to be essential. If Dustin's earlier question, where's the money? Where are you going to get the financing for this, okay? These are typically going to be contracts that need to be 15 to 20 years in length. Not everybody who currently wishes in the residential sector or in the commercial sector can say, I'm going to be around for 15 or 20 years. I think that would not be a reasonable proposition to make, okay, for that purpose. So you need an entity that can provide that kind of continuing governance and administration, ongoing governance and administration that reflects the interests and the purposes of its citizens. And that's why we include as a partner. When you do that, you're then going to get that financing opportunity. So I just want to quickly insert that, okay? But then I just want to say there is a last option too that is in the bill. If for whatever reason a county is not interested in creating a community sustainable energy authority that would then service unincorporated as well as, for that matter, incorporated communities, the Delaware Sustainable Energy Utility is also authorized under the bill to do this. So you have two options that I would say. One is your county and the other is the Delaware Sustainable Energy Utility.
Speaking of the SCU, we had a question here. Do they also issue grants, particularly for low-income communities?
Yes, the Delaware SCU has adopted a policy of grants. And that is one way to get greater participation for low-income communities, low and moderate income communities. But I just want to point out that there are other ways. I don't know if we're going to talk about that Dustin, but there are ways in which we can cooperate and make this work too. So one way is grants, but another way is through cooperation. So you give me the cue, Dustin, when you're ready for that sort of thing.
Sure thing. I do want to get to this other question that we have on Facebook. The question is, with regards to this Community Sustainability Energy Authority that will lead to development of these community solar projects, kind of at a high level, how will this be structured to deploy the community solar projects?
So I did bring a couple of props for that. Would this be a good time, Dustin, to at least show?
Sure thing, yep.
Okay. So give me just a moment. Let me find my share screen, and then let me, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. And then let me, this is one example of, this is where a governmental entity takes front and center responsibility, either a city or a county. It's very popular in parts of the US that are using this model, in which the cities or the counties themselves become anchors. They have their own, they have property that they manage on behalf of their citizens. That includes the rooftops and the parking lots and the other rooftops of public buildings, parking lots, and so on that they manage. And they can also enter into contracts with entities that own land, either private or public sector entities that own land. So one way in which this model works is that the city or county creates its authority, and then, to answer your question, it often relies upon, enlists, invites in private parties to design, finance, install, operate systems that are on public property. And through their city council or through their county council, these things are then managed as to serve the needs and goals of their community. For example, in places that we'll talk about, I think, in a little bit, places that we can talk about of this, the cities have often used these public properties to dedicate a portion of the renewable energy source to communities that currently find themselves in problems of unaffordability. It's not simply of solar, but they have problems with being able to afford the basic services of electricity in their community. So that then means that the county or the city dedicates a portion of that lower cost option to those families who then see their electricity bills go down. Okay, that's one basic way. How would the Community Sustainable Energy Authority get the financing for that? One option, as we've indicated, is the Delaware SEU. Sometimes the electric utilities often have some form of rebate or other loan program and that kind of thing. And then, as I mentioned to you before, there is the community solar renewable energy credits that would come for this purpose, and the net metering, that is that the consumer is receiving the same rate, I'm sorry, not the consumer, the participants are receiving the same rate for their electricity or lower than what they were paying under their existing provider. So that's where it would come from. It's not likely that the city or county would build these projects themselves, but it has happened. Some of you may have been out to Atlantic City, and the Atlantic City wastewater plants have solar on their plants. They bought that as part of the overall commitment to provide their service, but provide it sustainably. So it could be that cities or counties will buy the equipment and so on themselves directly, but they can also buy it through the market. And then you would have private parties that would then come in and would be willing to provide that additional energy. Let me just quickly show you this one as the next option. Here you have the same basic structure you can see in the middle and the right columns, but now we are going to form community solar partnerships. And this is going to happen by community organizations coming together. these community organizations are going to meet basic requirements that the act entails, which is that they would have they would be incorporated for the purposes of being able to write long-term contracts. They would be able to, they would have a board and bylaws and would be governed by community members. They would have an explicit policy on service to low and moderate income families, along with the requirements of the same order for the city partner. And they would then come together. They would be certified as a community solar partnership, and they would come together with their city or county to then develop these projects. Again, the use of, if is so desired, the private parties, but the big difference between what is sort of happening episodically and at a very slow rate at this time in Delaware and really throughout the country, that other subscription solar goes very slowly, and it's not developing very much, and it's not governed by communities, okay? In this approach, the communities would play an even bigger role because the community organizations themselves now become a partner. What would that look like in real time? So if I may, I know we have Lisa Locke from Delaware Interfaith Power and Light. This organization has been developing what I think is going to become a prototype in Delaware, which is that churches are getting together and saying, we will, as part of this opportunity, we will enter into a community solar partnership. And these churches, by the character of their own worshipers, can bring communities that have had difficulty accessing this opportunity in the past, bring them in as part of the partnership that the churches have developed together. But I also want to say, you're in the midst of another organization that could do something. I want to salute DEIPL because I think they are really out there early out the gate trying to do this. And my understanding, I asked Lisa for permission, my understanding is there is fairly senior level discussion among leaderships of church communities in the state to launch this kind of opportunity quickly after it is made available by hopefully the passage of this law. But I just want to say there's another community out there that's all around you at the moment, which is that the Sierra Club itself could organize for its members the opportunity to contribute to a Sierra Club-led partnership. Sierra Club could pick it's going to be a partner with all 3 counties. It could pick it wants to start in one place and work with one city or whatever, but Sierra Club could. And if it wants to go statewide, again, the Delaware Sustainable Energy Utility has the opportunity to offer that kind of support. Sierra Club could put together a partnership for the development of this kind of opportunity.
So it sounds like this, particularly compared to, where we're at now, is much more of the likelihood of being a grassroots-driven, from the bottom up movement to really spark Senator McDowell's long sought after photovoltaic revolution, so to speak.
You've heard that one, huh? Yeah, no, I think that is right. This mobilizes, when we say grassroots, that's all of us, and it mobilizes much more of our community to get involved. And so I think, yes, I think this is an effort to substantially widen both the opportunity and the market, okay? And to do it in a way that allows governance and administration to express the larger social goals and purposes of our state.
So is there anything that we missed in terms of how this legislation, community solar or the RPS in general, can help low-income communities or families in particular? Is there incentives to specifically help individuals?
Right, that's a very good point again, Dustin. I know you've been trying to work hard on this issue for quite some time. I don't mean the community solar bill. I mean you've been working on making sure that we have sustainable energy for all and not just for selected parts of our society. So the community solar renewable energy credit is a way in which you're creating a stream of revenue for these projects, that all of which require low and moderate income participation. So that's in the bill, okay? Also, low and moderate income representation on boards, both the governmental boards and the community boards, so that again, there is an ability for a policy of a ongoing basis to be developed for this particular purpose. And I think that those two items, the governance item and the incentive item through the community solar renewable energy credits, are specifically designed to increase the ability for all of our communities to participate in this and not to have this unfortunate energy injustice that has characterized the energy market for too long in the U.S.
So, sorry for getting some weird feedback on my end for some reason. You and I had spoken about this a little bit before, and the opportunity for creating local green job creation through these projects. So
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, communities who are organizing these projects would be able to almost require that the jobs in producing their project come from their community, or come from at least from Delaware?
Yeah, both are true, Dustin. And I do want to mention that it's actually policy for the Delaware Sustainable Energy Utility that local is preferenced for this purpose. So if you want to finance and so on with the Delaware SEU, there is an obligation to show a local job creation, and it could also be, depending upon the equipment that you're purchasing, but purchase of from local manufacturers and so on. So yeah, that is a big part of what is the effort here.
Well, thank you, and thank you everybody for continuing to watch here on Zoom or on Facebook. We got about 10 minutes left, and I'd like to kind of get your take, particularly with everything that's going on with the budget and COVID, and we're now in a historical time where the General Assembly, for the first time in its history, is meeting virtually. Where do we stand on this legislation right now?
Okay, and I do want to mention I have a thought for you that will make this realistic, but I'd like to put it at the end of whenever you tell me, Dustin, that the last 2 minutes or something, or the last minute, I just would like to remind you that I'd like to let people know that this is actual, not occurring in Delaware currently, but is occurring in other communities in the U.S., okay? So on the bill itself, I had a conversation with the principal sponsor of the bill, Senator Harris McDowell, and he indicated that I should note that he had a very positive conversation. They were meeting 6 feet apart, but the governor and he met very recently on this bill in the last couple of days, and the governor has indicated to him that he supports the underlying principles of this bill. The senator, as far as I understand, I'm more on the analysis side, along with Joe, but the senator has been in, as I understand it from him, in regular conversation with the governor's office and other executive agencies, in addition, of course, to talking with his members of the legislature. And it would appear that the bill has substantial support, and that if they can work out a schedule for voting bills, that this bill would come forward and would appear to have a goodly number of sponsors in both the House and the Senate.
Great. That's very good news.
But saying that, okay, as all of you know, you have been through this.
Winds change.
So, yeah, that is the possibility. But if DEIPL, if Sierra Club, if so many of our good civil society tissue can get out and make sure that that legislators know that this has high salience for you at this time. You want to see this bill acted on. Nothing happened last year. You don't want to wait another year. You want action. I think this is the great opportunity also our very good community groups to let their legislators know that they're being watched and they're going to be held accountable. So I think this is a good, yeah. So I do see a question on permitting, if in case you want to.
Yeah, we have a few more questions that do dive a little bit more into the weeds, I think. So two around net metering and how it interacts with community solar in particular.
Sure.
So one question, does this change anything in terms of the retail credits for the net metering under this new legislation? The audience member who brought this up says under the existing statute, full retail credits are only permitted if the project is located in the same feeder as to where the credits are being delivered to. So this follow-up question is kind of, is there any plans to increase the net metering cap to support these new RPS goals?
So on the first one, that's a really important question, and it has been, I would say, a barrier to the development of community solar. This bill removes the requirement that you be on the same on the same circuit, and that you're within a mile of each other, and those sorts of things. And I want to indicate that this did not have opposition from. I just want to be clear. Delmarva Power actually supported removal of that barrier. And why would Delmarva Power want to remove that barrier? If you have to organize a market like this and be a participant in buying the community solar RECs, those kinds of impediments actually, or those kinds of rules actually make it very difficult for you to achieve the targets that you're expected to achieve. So I think that those old problems on the net metering side, that part of it is going away. On the second question, is there any increase? For example, we're at 110% of your native load. So if you use 1,000 kilowatt hours, you can sell up to 1,100 kilowatt hours under the net metering. Okay, you get credit. I shouldn't say sell. You get credit under the net metering policy. There is not at this time in this bill a change in that level of generation above what is your own annual load. Okay, that's another matter to address in the policy case, and it's something that we probably should address in the coming years. But right now, we need to create the infrastructure to have those entities that can actually do this up to 110%, and then we can work maybe next on changing those net metering rules beyond that.
I feel like it's going to be a similar answer to this next question from Facebook. Was there any changes into the approved renewable energy resources in this newest edition of the bill? Specifically, is biomass anaerobic digestion still included as a eligible renewable resource, particularly looking at poultry waste?
So certainly anaerobic digestion is still there, and forms of biomass that are sustainably harvested is still there. That has not been changed. There is discussion about another change that I can't say that, I don't know the status of this other change, okay? But there was a particular eligible resource created by the use of natural gas to provide the hydrogen for fuel cell. And I know there's some concern about that because it doesn't appear to be a renewable source. You're depending on natural gas for that purpose. So there is under discussion that particular question.
Thank you. And then in terms of permitting, does this legislation include any direction regarding streamlining the permitting process? I assume they're speaking for these new projects. Or does it provide any high-level direction on integrating the power into the overall grid?
So this is also, that's an excellent question. You've got a lot of folks who know their way around this system, and that's a really important question as well. The this particular bill, as far as I'm aware, does not directly take on the permitting question, but I do want to just quickly emphasize, US is currently paying roughly twice as much for permitting and related soft costs in developing a project than in Europe. That is a measurement that has now been followed by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory for the last few years, and it's something that we need to address. Again, could we have done that in this bill? There's a lot of things that need to be addressed, and there'll be no shortage of opportunity for our good community groups to work on improvements, okay, next year. But I have to say, as far as I know, that permitting question has not been directly addressed. Now, I do want to say that there is an indirect, so this is an indirect method. If your city creates or your county creates a community sustainable energy authority, that authority is quickly going to tell you that streamlining the permitting will actually be to the benefit of the city or the county, okay, that's trying to spur development of this. Because as you lower those costs, not lowering those costs and reducing compliance with standards that do need to be met, okay, instead just making it less costly to obtain all of the permits that are needed in a expeditious manner, okay? Doing that will actually spur the market in your city or your county or your incorporated town, okay? So it's to the benefit of everyone that we start to address that problem, but it would be, Dustin, on the question that was asked, it would be an indirect, if you will, push, pressure, incentive to do something about that cost.
Great. So we're actually right at 4 o'clock, but I do want to give you a couple minutes to have any final thoughts or anything that you would like to share with us.
I have one thing that I would like to share. Was that the cue to me to get my last minute in?
You.
Okay.
That is your cue, yes.
Now I'm trying to get it.
Ah, okay.
Here comes my cue.
Visual aids.
So I wanted to present to you a real model that actually has existed for over 10 years now. It is in California. There are models in Minnesota and New York and some other jurisdictions. And when Joe Nyongon issues his report, you're going to be able to learn that it's not. But you know, I have 1 minute, so I'm going to give you my last minute. Okay. More than 24 cities and 3 counties have come together in California. And here is how the new approach to the provision of your electricity service takes place. You can go on their website. It's Marin Clean Energy, My Community, My Choice. You can choose 60%. You can choose 100%, which involves deep retrofits, including energy efficiency. And you can choose 100% on the question that Dustin asked. Not only is that 100%, but that it is done with local labor, okay? Here are the cost differences. When you develop this properly, now, what I'm giving you is where we need to go in Delaware. We're not going to be able to do this next month, okay? It's going to take more work on getting the market to be able to do this kind of thing. But I just want to, currently, the customers in that area pay as an average bill, they pay $133 a month, okay, for their energy. And because they are in California that has a more aggressive renewable portfolio standard, they get about 39% of their renewable electricity from renewable sources. Okay? For $1 more, let me get that, $1 more per month, you go in that area from 39% to 61. The 60% model, they haven't changed their website, but they're now not offering 60, they're now offering 61%. Okay? For $1 more. For $6 more, you can have 100% renewable energy with the use of deep dive energy efficiency as well, okay? The reason I'm taking you through this and why I think it's so important is this is real time. This is actually existing. There are community members all over this area that I'm about to tell you about just quickly, okay, that are taking advantage of this, and the cost differentials are very small. Can't our communities find ways to make sustainable energy for all affordable for all members, okay, of the society? And what I'm just suggesting to you is a well-developed approach can do exactly that at $139. It is more expensive now because the local market for manufacturing, for installation, and so on is just beginning to be developed. This 100% local solar, this is not something that is done in the mountain, in the valleys and the mountains of California. This is actually local solar that's going on the rooftops, it's going on the carports, it's going in the land areas that would make sense. You don't want to use agricultural land to do this, but it does cost more currently, but it costs more because the market is still in the process of being developed, okay? Having said that, if you look at the comparison in cost, this is not an unreachable goal for us, again, if we do this intelligently. The last thing I'd like to mention is that for this 20 some odd cities and 3 counties, 39% of this community is communities of color. There is no necessity for us to make the mistake that was made in the previous energy system where we shunned certain communities that just couldn't get affordable, accessible power. We can change that. 39% communities of color. We can have black and brown, we can have low and moderate income, we can have everybody in as part of this project. It is feasible to do. And it's not something that is simply a professor at a university telling you about. This is in place. Imagine sometime, hopefully, not in the too distant future, but you'll be able to go to this kind of website and click for your interest in moving renewable energy forward. That's it. You're muted, Dustin.
There we go. I'm back. So I do want to note a couple of things. Our energy kilowatt price to compare is not the same as California. And
that's for sure.
I don't want anybody to take this video out of context and say that these are the costs that are going to be incurred here in Delaware.
That's correct.
So I'd also like to make sure everybody knows that the Delaware Sierra Club does have an active campaign on their website. On our website, it's sierraclub.org/Delaware. And you'll see right on the right side of the screen a letter campaign where you can send a letter to your legislators and ask them to co-sponsor Senator McDowell's legislation before it is filed. And so if you have not yet sent a letter to your legislator, I would ask that you kindly do so as soon as possible. It's sierraclub.org/Delaware, and it'll be on the right side of your screen. Right now, we are really trying to get our legislators to talk to Senator McBride and asking that he support this legislation and bring it to the floor for a vote. And so we can get it over to the House and on to the governor and make this historic change in Delaware for our communities. You will be able to type a personalized message that will be sent first before the pre-prepared letter that you will be able to preview before clicking send. So I encourage you to take that opportunity to do that. We're going to continue putting out a lot of information on our website, so make sure you follow our webpage and follow us on Facebook if you haven't yet. We will have a resources tab where you can learn more about the renewable energy bill. We're working on a number of fact sheets. We're working on a number of video projects and different things to help disseminate information and educate everybody on this issue. So I'd like to thank everybody. We are a little bit over time, so I do want to wrap up and thank you, Dr. Byrne, for joining us today and helping bring a lot of valuable information. I see others agree with me as well. And with that in mind, we will go ahead and end the live stream. Thank you all very much for tuning in.
Thank you all.